Hey guys, tonight we begin with the quiet misery of medieval winters. Nights so cold they could crack the walls, fires that burned low and smoky, and cottages where even sleep refused to come easily. For centuries, people whispered about those long, frozen nights, how the cold seemed almost alive, how it crept beneath the door, and how even the bravest souls feared what silence could do to the mind. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together, a quiet exploration of why you wouldn't last a single night in a frozen medieval cottage. The wind has a way of speaking when everything else has gone quiet. It doesn't rush or roar here, it sighs, low and steady, through the white emptiness of a frozen field. The sound is neither comforting nor threatening, it's just there, like a reminder that time still moves, even when the world seems asleep beneath layers of frost. Tonight, you are walking along a narrow track, the kind that isn't marked on any map. The snow crunches softly under your boots, a rhythm that slows with every step. Ahead, in the deep blue haze of evening, a dim orange glow flickers a cottage, lonely and small, breathing smoke into the vast silence of the medieval countryside. There is no sound of birds, no echo of people, only the gentle rattle of the wind brushing against frozen trees. The air feels older than you, like something that has existed for centuries, untouched and watchful. You feel it press against your face, against your breath, and you realize that the cold is not just a temperature, it's a presence. It moves through everything, the trees, the soil, your skin, a quiet awareness that watches you cross its domain. Each step feels heavier, as if the snow itself wants to slow you down, to make you think twice before you reach the door ahead. The cottage looks small enough to fit inside the shadow of a barn. Its thatched roof hangs low, weighed down by snow, and the tiny window flickers faintly with firelight. You can smell the smoke before you reach it, damp wood, faintly sour, mixed with the scent of wet straw. It's the smell of old life, of survival, of a home that has endured many winters just like this one. The closer you come, the more you can hear the wind pressing against the walls, like a beast sniffing for warmth it can't have. The door stands crooked, swollen by years of weather. When you finally touch it, it feels like stone. You push it open, slowly, and the world shifts. Inside, the air is thicker, but not warmer. The dim fire struggles on a bed of ash, sending out a weak, trembling light. The room smells of peat smoke, wool, and the faint tang of salted meat hanging somewhere above. Your breath, still visible, mixes with the haze of smoke that never quite leaves the air. The floor is rough, packed dirt dusted with straw. Shadows move across the walls, not from ghosts or people, but from the way the firelight flickers through uneven gaps in the wood. Every shape seems to breathe, to stretch, to sigh. You stand quietly, listening. There are sounds, but none of them are sudden. A faint drip of water from the roof, the low creak of wood shifting under cold. The wind outside testing the shutters, finding every hole it can whisper through. And then there's something else softer, subtler, like the sound of fabric brushing against fabric or a slow breath drawn from somewhere unseen. It's not frightening, not yet, just strange in a room where no one else should be awake. You look around and it disappears, swallowed by the constant hum of the wind. The fire snaps, weakly. You move toward it, your hands out, but the warmth doesn't reach you. The medieval hearth was never meant for comfort, it was meant for survival. Its smoke rises through a small hole in the roof, taking most of the heat with it. The family who lives here, they know better than to expect warmth. Their world is made of layers, wool, straw, and patience. You can almost see them in your mind, sleeping together near the wall, wrapped in rags and silence. The smallest children pressed close to the mother's side, the father still half awake, listening for the wind's change. Because sometimes, when the wind shifts, it means the storm is coming back. You notice how the walls breathe, not literally of course, but with the slow rhythm of the firelight, inhale, exhale, shadows deepening and retreating. It gives the illusion that the cottage itself is alive, a tired creature holding in its warmth the pot is. Way lungs hold air. There's a small sound above you, the scurry of something light and quick. Mice perhaps, or birds nesting where they shouldn't. In this world, everything fights for a corner of warmth, even the smallest things that no one ever sees. You remember hearing once that people used to leave bits of bread or straw for the spirits of the house. They called them housewights, unseen helpers that guarded the home during the long dark months. If they were ignored, it was said, the fire would not catch the next morning. No one knew if it was true, but no one risked finding out. Your eyes adjust to the dimness. The furniture is sparse, a stool, a small table, a wooden chest. Every object seems worn thin by use, shaped by years of repetition. The table's edge gleams where countless hands have rested. The chest creaks with a low, tired voice as the wind nudges it. You begin to realize that nothing here is truly still. Everything moves in its own slow rhythm, guided by the breathing of the fire. Outside, the world freezes solid, but inside, life persists in tiny, fragile motions. The crackle of wood, the soft shifting of straw, the drip, the sigh, the whisper. There's a strange comfort in it, the quiet understanding that warmth here isn't a feeling but a pursuit. People didn't have heat, they earned it every hour. The fire demanded attention, the walls demanded patching, the cold demanded respect. To survive was to listen to the silence, to notice when it changed. The medieval people knew this instinctively. They could tell, from the pitch of the wind, whether it carried snow or just the sharp breath of the north. They could hear, in the sound of creaking beams, whether the roof was holding or beginning to give. In a way, their nights were not sleepless, they were vigilant. And still, there's something peculiar in this cottage, something you can't quite name. A faint hum, like a vibration beneath the stillness. It doesn't come from the fire, or the wind, or any living thing. It's the sound of age itself, the quiet resonance of a space that has endured too many winters. The walls are soaked with history, with sighs, whispers, and the small noises that never leave. If you close your eyes, you could almost imagine that the house remembers every person who ever stepped inside, their voices caught between the beams like trapped smoke. Outside, the snow deepens. The orange light flickers in the window, barely visible now through the frost. The door swells in its frame, the hinges muttering softly. Inside, the temperature seems to drop a little more, even though the fire still burns. The feeling of cold here is not sudden, it's patient, it waits. It seeps into your shoes, into your sleeves, into the space between breaths. You try to warm your hands near the fire, but they sting instead, a reminder that the warmth is too thin, too far away. You wonder how anyone endured this for an entire season. In the corner, there's a small wooden icon, a faint carving of a saint, or perhaps a forgotten household god. The surface is blackened with soot, its features nearly erased. People in these centuries believed such things could protect them not from the cold itself, but from what the cold might bring, because winter, to them, was not just weather. It was a spirit that walked unseen, testing doors, looking for weakness. Some said it carried voices, the whispers of travellers who never made it home. You don't need to believe it, but when you listen closely enough, the wind does sound oddly human. It moves like breath, like something half-remembered trying to speak again. You stay there for a long time, doing nothing, simply listening. The rhythm of the place begins to sink in, the pulse of the fire, the sigh of the roof, the soft moan of the wind crawling along the walls. Everything feels ancient, endless, and strangely fragile. You start to understand why warmth meant survival, and survival meant devotion. The cold wasn't just endured, it was worshipped, in a way, because every moment against it was borrowed time. Somewhere outside, a dog barks once, then stops. The sound fades into the white silence. Inside, the cottage waits. The night stretches ahead, long and slow. The fire flickers again, and for an instant, you think you see movement in the farthest corner, a shadow that doesn't belong to you, or to the flames. It doesn't move again, and perhaps it never did. It might have been nothing more than smoke twisting in the low light, but still, for a second, the thought lingers that you are not entirely alone here, and that perhaps the cottage, in its own tired way, is watching you back. The door creaks open with a hesitant groan, and for a brief moment, you almost expect warmth to spill out the gentle relief of firelight, the soft hum of a home, but it doesn't. Instead, the air that greets you is still and sharp, carrying the faint smell of damp straw and ancient wood that has absorbed centuries of smoke. The darkness inside feels thick, as though it has weight. You step in slowly, and the floor beneath you murmurs not from weakness, but from memory. This is the heart of survival in a frozen medieval night. A peasant's cottage, no larger than a modern bedroom, made from whatever the land could spare. The walls, a patchwork of mud and straw, hold together with stubborn patience. The roof is thatched and uneven, its corners curled from the endless assault of wind and frost. The only window, if it could be called that, is no more than a small hole covered with a sheet of oil-soaked cloth, trying and failing to keep the cold from seeping in. Inside, the light is almost non-existent. A single tallow candle flickers near the hearth, its smoke rising lazily, leaving a greasy stain on the low beams above. The hearth itself is little more than a shallow pit of stones, with a few glowing embers left from the day's last fire. You can almost hear them sigh, as if exhausted from trying to keep this place alive. In the corner, a crude bed rests on the ground, a simple frame of sticks, covered in straw and wrapped with old sacks. Sometimes, the straw would be replaced with dry moss, or even reeds if someone lived near the marshlands. But tonight, it crackles under a thin wool blanket that hasn't felt warmth in weeks. Lying here wouldn't be comfortable. It would be necessary. If you look closer, you notice the walls glistening faintly in the candlelight. Moisture, the silent intruder of winter. During the coldest nights, frost would creep inside, forming tiny crystals along the mud walls. In the morning, the frost would melt and drip down slowly, leaving cold trails across the packed earth floor. Peasants used to say the cottage wept during the night, a sad little superstition, but when you live in such places, everything feels alive. The air smells of smoke, earth, and something faintly sour, fermented grain perhaps, or a pot of cabbage stew long since turned cold. Food was a quiet ritual here, not a meal, but an offering to survival itself. Most nights, there was little more than black bread and broth, cooked once and reheated for days. The pot still hangs above the fire, blackened beyond recognition, but solid, reliable, the kind of tool passed down generations, as though it carried the spirit of endurance within its metal. You notice something strange: the silence. It isn't the comforting quiet of modern homes. It's dense, almost pressing. The only sounds are the faint rustle of straw, the whisper of the candle, and perhaps the occasional shuffle of something small moving between the cracks of the wall. Mice, most likely. But to those who lived here, they were just part of the household. They took a share of the food, yes, but they also shared the heat. And in a world where warmth was the most precious thing, even mice were not truly unwelcome. In the far corner, a wooden chest sits half buried in shadow. Its lid is warped, and the lock is long gone. Inside would be all that mattered to the family: a few rags, maybe a piece of bread, a small religious token, or a single wooden cup. Peasants didn't hoard objects. They hoarded hope, and hope needed very little space. There is something almost ritualistic about the arrangement of the cottage. Everything serves a purpose. The tiny cracks near the floor allow a little air to circulate when the fire burns. The thatch above isn't perfectly sealed, so that a faint curl of smoke can escape without smothering the room. Even the uneven floor helps catch bits of heat from the coals, making it just slightly less unbearable to walk barefoot in the early dawn. And yet, despite all these small signs of human ingenuity, there's a feeling that something watches quietly from within the shadows. Not menacing, just ancient, as if the cottage itself remembers every night it has endured. Every family that once slept huddled together beneath its sagging roof. The walls have heard whispered prayers, quiet sobs, and the dull rhythm of teeth chattering through endless winters. You realize that this space isn't just a shelter, it's a living archive of survival. Each crack, each dark corner is a record of a struggle that was never glorious, never written down, but deeply, painfully human. The flickering candle draws your eye once more, its flame trembling against the cold air. It won't last the night, and when it finally gives out, the darkness will reclaim everything. Yet somehow, in that endless darkness, life would continue. The night deepens, and the cold begins to show its true weight. It is not the kind of cold that stings and passes, it lingers, presses, and seeps into every hidden corner of thought. It becomes something alive, something you can almost hear. The wind outside hums low against the thatched roof, and with every gust, a soft shudder moves through the walls, as if the cottage itself exhales in pain. You can feel it now, the air growing heavier, denser, more deliberate. Your breath drifts slowly before you, pale and ghostly in the dim light of the embers. Every exhale feels like giving away a small piece of warmth you can never reclaim. The fire has burned low, leaving behind quiet red coals that glow faintly like forgotten stars, struggling to survive the vast black sky of the room. The cold has a way of reshaping time. Minutes no longer feel like minutes. They stretch, dissolve, and reform into something slow and uncertain. You find yourself counting sounds just to remember that the world still moves: the creak of a beam, the sigh of wind through the gaps, the faint shuffle of straw as the temperature sinks lower still. Somewhere in that rhythm, you start to understand what survival truly meant in a frozen medieval night. It was not about courage, it was about patience, the quiet, almost stubborn act of waiting. The weight of the cold is not just physical, it settles on the mind. People in those times used to speak of the white silence, a strange mental fog that came when the cold was so absolute it seemed to hush even your own thoughts. Travellers would describe hearing whispers in the snow, faint voices calling them to step outside. Many believed it was the spirits of winter, not malicious, but curious. Lonely, perhaps. In truth, it was likely the sound of wind, playing tricks on the exhausted and the half-frozen. But in the deep of night, when everything else is still, even a trick of air can feel like a conversation. Inside the cottage, you can imagine the family gathered around the last remnants of warmth. A mother wrapping her child tighter in the blanket, the father sitting close to the fire, staring into the coals as if they hold some secret he's too tired to hear. The silence between them isn't empty, it's filled with the quiet work of staying alive. The mother occasionally reaches forward to turn a piece of wood, even though there's no more wood left. It's a habit, a gesture of hope more than action. Outside, the world has vanished into a storm of darkness and frost. Snowdrifts build against the door, pushing gently, insistently. You can almost hear it, a faint scratching sound, soft but constant. To those half asleep inside, it might sound like someone knocking. Old stories said that winter spirits would test your door in the coldest hours. If you answered, if you let them in, they would take your warmth for themselves. So you didn't move, you didn't speak, you just waited. Even the animals outside have fallen silent. The forest beyond the cottage lies buried under an ocean of white stillness. The trees, stripped of all their softness, look skeletal against the faint light of the moon. Every branch holds a thin shimmer of ice that catches the smallest glow from the sky, so that from a distance the forest seems to breathe. The peasants used to say the trees whispered to one another in winter, a language only the cold could understand. Back inside, the cottage grows tighter. The air, once just cold, now begins to feel heavy, a slow creeping chill that reaches the bones and lingers there. Your fingers go numb first, then your feet. The body resists, sending small tremors of shivering through your frame. But after a while, even that begins to fade. The body learns to surrender. It saves its warmth for the heart, the lungs, the brain. Everything else is left to the mercy of frost. It's strange how the human mind changes under such quiet suffering. You begin to hear things that aren't really there. The sound of footsteps in the corner, a soft murmur, as if someone outside is talking low under the snow. Sometimes even a faint melody, not quite music, not quite wind, just a rhythm that repeats in your head. Medieval peasants often spoke of the hum of the frost, a sound that would come just before dawn. They said it was the earth itself, sighing under the weight of ice. Hours pass this way, though you can't tell how many. The candle has long since died, leaving only the faint orange pulse of the embers. The darkness feels thicker now, almost like a second skin. Every time the wind rises, the thatch above you stirs, scattering tiny bits of frozen dust that sparkle for a heartbeat before fading into nothing. In the farthest corner, where the shadows are deepest, the frost begins to creep upward from the floor, a delicate lace of white crystals forming on the straw. It moves silently, almost beautifully, like a slow tide reclaiming the shore. You can see your breath dance above it, fading into the black air, and for a fleeting moment, it feels like the cold itself is alive, watching, listening, waiting. If you were to step outside now, the world would greet you with a kind of beauty that hurts to look at. The frozen ground gleams under the pale glow of the moon, and the snow seems to hum faintly the sound of a world held completely still. You might even forget, for a moment, how dangerous it is. The cold has that power. It lures you with its stillness, with its promise of silence. It makes you think that if you just close your eyes and rest, it might not be so bad. And yet, inside that tiny cottage, surrounded by breath and shiver, someone is still awake. Maybe it's the child, eyes half open, staring at the faint glow of the fire. Maybe it's the father, counting the seconds between each gust of wind. Or perhaps it's you listening, waiting, wondering what it must have felt like to live through such nights, not as a story, but as a routine. The cold doesn't end all at once. It lingers like a thought, quiet and persistent. And when morning finally comes, it doesn't bring warmth, just a lighter shade of grey, a sky that seems unsure whether to rise or sink. But for now, in this frozen hour, all that exists is the sound of breathing slow, steady, fragile, and the heavy, ancient weight of the cold. The dawn never truly breaks in winter. It only softens the darkness, a faint, hesitant light that seeps into the world without warmth. Inside the cottage, that grey light falls gently over the sleeping forms, illuminating the frost that has crept into every crevice of the room. The embers in the hearth are no longer red, they have turned the colour of old ash, quiet and defeated, and yet this is when the struggle for warmth truly begins. The peasant family stirs slowly, their movements heavy, dreamlike. The first breath of morning feels like swallowing ice. There's no rush, no chatter, no complaint. Only the slow ritual of waking up in a world where warmth is not a comfort, it is a daily battle. The father rises first. His joints crack softly as he moves, a sound that seems to echo through the quiet. He does not stretch or sigh. He simply sits for a moment, gathering his strength, as though he must negotiate with his body to move again. His first task is the fire, always the fire. He kneels beside the hearth, his hands trembling slightly as he brushes aside the layer of ash, searching for a spark that might still be alive. There's a kind of reverence in the way he does it, not desperation, but quiet hope. The fingers are clumsy from the cold, and the wood is damp, refusing to catch. Each strike of flint releases a small burst of light, followed by nothing. But he persists, because in this world, persistence is the only form of resistance that matters. Finally, a thin curl of smoke rises. It is fragile, hesitant, and almost invisible in the dim light. He cups it carefully, feeding it bits of dry straw, coaxing it as one might comfort a frightened child. When the first flame catches, it's almost too small to see, yet it fills the room with a faint sense of relief. Not heat, but the promise of it. It's strange how much comfort can come from something so small. Around him, the others begin to move. The mother gathers what little they have, scraps of bread, perhaps a turnip left over from the night before, and places them near the fire to soften. The children stay wrapped in their straw bedding a little longer, pretending to sleep, listening to the quiet rhythm of their parents' motions. They know not to speak yet. In these moments, the air is sacred, a silence bound by survival. The warmth, when it finally begins to spread, is faint and uneven. It doesn't chase away the cold, it merely holds it back for a while. You can almost feel the air shifting, the frozen breath lifting, the dampness rising from the floor. In the corners, the frost clings stubbornly to the walls, slowly weeping as it melts. The smell of smoke begins to fill the room again, thick and heavy. It clings to the skin, to the fabric, to memory itself. They sit close to the fire, not touching, but sharing its reach. Every inch closer means another moment of comfort. You can imagine the father's hand hovering just above the flame, his fingers rough and cracked, marked by winters upon winters. The mother wraps a cloth around her hands before she reaches for the pot, an old iron one, so blackened with soot it seems part of the earth. She fills it with a handful of water from a wooden bucket, then adds what little they have, some grain, a sliver of onion, perhaps a few dried herbs. The smell, faint as it is, begins to drift through the room like a memory of better days. Outside, the wind stirs again. It carries the hollow sound of the frozen world, trees bending, ice cracking, snow shifting under its own weight. The walls groan softly as they resist it. Inside, the family listens. Every gust feels personal, as though the world beyond their walls is reminding them just how thin the line between warmth and cold truly is. As the fire grows stronger, something strange begins to happen, the kind of thing that only reveals itself when you watch the ordinary for long enough. The smoke curls in strange patterns, almost deliberate, like faint handwriting against the air. For a moment, it looks as though the cottage itself is breathing. Medieval people believed that fire was alive, that it could sense intention, reward patience, and punish haste. Perhaps they weren't entirely wrong. In this place, in this silence, even the smallest flicker of flame feels aware. The warmth spreads slowly, unevenly. The walls remain cold, but the centre of the room begins to thaw. The family huddles around the hearth, their faces softening as the feeling returns to their skin. The father takes a small sip from the pot, testing it. then passes it to the others. It isn't a feast. It isn't even satisfying. But it's something warm, something shared. And that, here, is everything. Yet the struggle never ends. Every log that burns brings both comfort and loss. The pile of wood in the corner is shrinking, each piece more precious than gold. They know that by nightfall, the room will be cold again, and so the day becomes a slow negotiation between warmth and scarcity. Some wood must be saved for the evening, when the cold grows crueler. The rest of the day will be spent gathering more, if they're lucky enough to find any. In some parts of medieval Europe, families would mix dung with straw and dry it to burn as fuel. It produced a thick, foul smoke, but it kept them alive. The smell would cling to the body for days, yet after a while, no one noticed. The mind, it seems, learns to stop complaining when it has nothing left to trade. You can almost feel the weariness settling in again, not despair, but a kind of calm acceptance. They know what this day will bring, because it is the same as the day before and the one before that. Survival isn't a story of triumph here. It's repetition, the quiet endurance of small, thankless acts that no one will remember. But in that repetition, there's a strange kind of peace. The steady crackle of the fire, the rhythm of breath, the faint hum of wind outside it becomes a song of its own. Not joyful, not sad, just steady, human. As the light grows brighter, the cottage begins to wake fully. The frost on the window melts into beads of water that trickle down the oiled cloth. The room smells of smoke and broth and earth, and though the air remains cold enough to bite, there's a fragile sense of life pulsing through it. It's easy, now, to forget how close they live to the edge. But the cold never forgets. It waits patiently beyond the walls, pressing against the door, breathing through the cracks. It knows that night will come again, and with it, another struggle for warmth. For now, though, the fire burns steady. The family sits together, wrapped in its faint glow, and for a few precious hours they are not cold. Not entirely. The day fades without ceremony. In the medieval countryside, there were no clocks to mark its passing, only the slow dimming of light through the oiled cloth window, the lengthening shadows stretching across the floor, and the deepening hush that settled over everything once the sun slipped away. Night did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, like a tide returning to reclaim what the day had borrowed. The fire burns low again. The father has rationed the wood carefully, feeding the flames only when absolutely necessary. Every piece burns too quickly, releasing its warmth in a brief, desperate burst before collapsing into embers. The air grows heavier, quieter. The sound of the wind changes, no longer sharp, but hollow, as though it's found a new voice in the darkness outside. The cottage responds in its own way, a groan here, a soft rattle there, like an old body settling into uneasy rest. The family begins to prepare for sleep, though preparing is perhaps too deliberate a word. There is no comfort to arrange, no bed to turn down. The straw bedding is stiff with frost, the blankets thin and damp at the edges. Still, they gather together, bodies close, limbs tangled, forming a fragile circle of warmth that defies the cold pressing in from every direction. The child rests between them, the mother's arm drawn across him like a quiet barrier against the night. Outside, the world disappears. The snow has begun to fall again, soft and unhurried. Each flake lands with a sound too quiet for human hearing. Yet if you listen long enough, you can almost imagine it, the faint whisper of countless tiny crystals building a new layer of silence over the earth. From time to time, a gust of wind scatters the flakes against the door, and the sound echoes faintly through the room, like a ghost brushing past the walls. Inside, the fire gives one last flicker before retreating into a dull red glow. The light it casts is faint and uneven, but enough to make the shadows dance gently across the ceiling. The air carries the scent of smoke, wool, and damp straw, the essence of winter life, condensed into a single breath. You can almost taste it, dry and metallic. It's the smell of endurance, of days repeated without promise, yet lived all the same. As the night deepens, the cold takes on a strange character. It no longer feels like weather. It feels like something ancient and sentient, something that watches and waits. In the dark corners of the cottage, where the faint light can't reach, it seems to gather and move, like breath on glass. Medieval people often spoke of the spirits of the frost beings that wandered the land in midwinter, invisible but heavy in presence. They were said to slip through keyholes and cracks, to sit beside sleeping families and breathe the warmth from their skin. No one feared them exactly. Fear required energy, and by this hour there was none left to spare. Instead, people treated them with quiet respect. They left small crumbs of bread near the door, or murmured a few words of acknowledgement before sleep. The family in this cottage might have done the same, a silent offering to whatever shared their space tonight. Hours pass, though it's impossible to know how many. The human mind drifts easily in such cold. Time becomes elastic, dreamlike. The body hovers between waking and sleep, never fully surrendering to either. The warmth from the huddled forms keeps them alive, but only barely. Every so often, one of them stirs, turning, adjusting, pulling the blanket tighter, and the faint sound of rustling straw becomes the only sign of life in the room. Somewhere in that half-dreaming state, the child begins to whisper. Perhaps he's talking to himself, or to something he sees behind his closed eyes. The mother murmurs softly, her voice too quiet to understand. It's a scene repeated through centuries, words spoken not to be heard, but to keep the silence from swallowing them whole. Outside, the forest sighs. The trees creak as their frozen limbs shift under the weight of snow. The air is so still that the sound carries for miles. A long, low groan that feels almost alive. If one were to step outside now, they would find the world transformed, the fields erased under a perfect, unbroken layer of white. The moonlight catches on the frost, turning the land into a mirror of quiet brilliance. It's beautiful, but in a way that feels indifferent to human life. Back inside, the family dreams of warmth, not fires or blankets, but memories of summer. The smell of cut hay, the feel of sun on bare skin, the distant hum of insects in a field. Even in sleep, the body remembers what it longs for. The cold, for all its power, cannot touch that part. There's a moment, somewhere in the deepest part of the night, when the world feels completely still. Even the wind pauses, as if holding its breath. The candle has long since gone out, and only the faintest red glimmer remains in the ashes. In that darkness, the sound of breathing becomes everything, slow, rhythmic, almost like waves on a frozen shore. You can hear the life inside this small house, fragile, persistent, and astonishingly quiet. And then, from somewhere far away, a sound emerges. A faint crack, the sharp crystalline note of ice splitting under its own weight. It could be the river freezing over, or a branch giving way in the forest. Or perhaps it's something closer, the frost creeping along the roof beams, expanding ever so slightly. It's impossible to tell. The sound fades almost as soon as it appears, leaving behind a stillness that feels heavier than before. They say that in winter, the line between life and death becomes thinner, softer, like a veil drawn only halfway closed. Maybe that's why the nights feel so long, so full of unseen things. The cold strips away noise, light, distraction, until all that's left is the quiet pulse of existence. The peasants who lived through such nights didn't think of survival as a victory. It was simply what had to be done, again and again, until the frost receded. The long night continues. The fire will be rekindled in the morning, the snow will be cleared from the door, and life will go on. But for now, everything rests. The world outside the cottage, blanketed in silence. The world inside, breathing slow and steady in the dark. And somewhere in that silence, between one breath and the next, the frost whispers once more against the window a faint, crystalline song, heard only by those who listen closely enough. The night drags on, though no one inside the cottage knows how much of it remains. Time, in the depth of winter, is not measured by hours but by sensations, the weight of the air, the sound of the wind, the pulse of warmth that flickers and fades. For the peasants lying in that dim room, the hours no longer seem to move forward. They stretch and fold, looping endlessly between wakefulness and the kind of sleep that never truly arrives. The father lies awake first, staring toward the faint red glow where the fire used to be. His breath clouds faintly in the air, dissolving before it reaches the ceiling. He listens not for danger, but for confirmation that the world still exists beyond the walls. Yet all he hears is the slow rhythm of breathing from his family beside him and the faint ticking of the wind brushing against the thatch above. He thinks of standing up, of adding one last splinter of wood to the ashes, but he knows it would be wasted. There is no warmth left to coax out of what remains. The mother does not sleep either. Her eyes are half open, unfocused, caught between exhaustion and vigilance. The stillness has begun to hum faintly in her ears, a strange, distant tone that might be real or might only exist within her tired mind. She tightens her hold on the child, whose small body shivers occasionally, even in sleep. She remembers a winter long ago when her own mother sang quietly through the nights, just to keep the silence from settling too deeply into the bones. Now she tries to recall that tune, but the melody escapes her, slipping into the dark like smoke through a crack. The child, though asleep, seems to dream uneasily. His lips move as if whispering, and once he gives a small laugh, a sound so out of place in that frozen room that the parents both glance toward him. It fades quickly, replaced by the soft murmur of sleep, but something about that moment lingers. It feels as though a boundary has shifted, as if the boy dreams of something more vivid than the waking world, a summer that still remembers him, perhaps, or a figure standing quietly just beyond the edge of sight. Outside, the wind changes again. It no longer moans but sighs long, slow exhalations that move through the valley like breath. If one were awake enough to listen closely, they might notice a pattern in it, almost like a voice speaking through the cold. Medieval folk often believed that such winds carried messages from the unseen whispers of the dead who wandered the long winter nights, retracing paths they once knew in life. These were not ghosts in the frightening sense, but fragments of memory, echoes of people and seasons that refused to fade entirely. Inside the cottage, the temperature drops further. Frost begins to form along the inside of the window, delicate branching patterns spreading like veins across the glass. The fire has long died, yet the faint red beneath the ash glows just enough to catch the shimmer of those icy filigrees. If one were to stare at them too long, they might imagine the patterns shifting, small figures emerging from the frost, moving slowly as if reenacting a life no one remembers. The father blinks, half awake, and for a moment thinks he sees something in the frost. A hand, perhaps, or the faint curve of a face pressed to the glass from the outside. But when he blinks again, it's gone, replaced by nothing more than light and pattern. He exhales slowly, letting the thought pass. In this kind of cold, the mind plays small tricks to stay occupied. Still, something feels different tonight. The silence has a weight to it, as though the air itself is listening. Even the usual creaks of the house seem subdued, as if the very wood has grown tired. The family lies motionless, suspended in that strange middle state between waking and sleep. They do not dream, not fully, but they drift through memories, through sounds, through moments that might not belong to them at all. At times, it feels as if the night itself is dreaming them. There are faint impressions, a summer field, golden and buzzing with life, the crackle of firewood that doesn't belong to this night, the murmur of voices, distant but familiar. These images come and go like reflections in disturbed water, never clear enough to grasp. Yet each time they fade, the cold presses closer, reclaiming the space they leave behind. Hours pass in this half-existence. The line between inside and outside grows thin. A draft moves gently through the cracks in the door, carrying with it the scent of snow, clean, sharp, and almost sweet. It mingles with the smell of wool and smoke until the whole room smells faintly of memory. The mother stirs once, her lips forming silent words, perhaps a prayer, though she no longer remembers the right one. And then, somewhere deep in the night, something small but distinct occurs, a faint, rhythmic tapping. Not loud, not alarming, but steady. It seems to come from the wall near the window, a soft, deliberate sound, like a knuckle brushing against wood. The father opens his eyes, listening. He counts the taps 3, then silence, then again 3 more. He waits, heart slow but alert. It could be the wind, he tells himself. Ice contracting, the wood shifting. But there is something oddly precise about it, something intentional. He doesn't move, doesn't speak. He simply listens until the sound stops. After a long moment, he exhales and closes his eyes again, though the quiet now feels slightly different, stretched, attentive, as if something unseen has entered the rhythm of the room. The child stirs again. In a soft voice, half dreaming, he whispers something no one understands. A single word, maybe 2. Then he falls still once more. Outside, the tapping does not return. Instead, a faint hush descends, not silence exactly, but the absence of motion. The snow has stopped falling. Even the wind has gone still. The world, for a brief and eerie moment, seems to hold its breath. If one could look out across the frozen fields now, everything would appear perfectly still, the kind of stillness that feels less like peace and more like waiting. The father finally drifts towards sleep, though it feels thin, fragile, as if resting on the surface of water. The mother remains half awake, her thoughts slipping in and out of coherence. She imagines she hears breathing that doesn't belong to them, faint, distant, as if from just beyond the wall, but she doesn't open her eyes. There's a quiet understanding that some things in the night are better left unacknowledged. And so the hours continue. Not in progress, but in repetition, the same breaths, the same stillness, the same pulse of cold that fills the gaps between. Sleep does not come easily in such nights. It hovers just out of reach, like a promise that refuses to be kept. By the time the first pale light touches the frost on the window, the family still hasn't truly slept. They lie in a silence that feels ancient, their dreams replaced by endurance. The cottage stands unchanged, the world outside buried under another layer of snow. And as dawn begins its slow, colourless climb, something curious happens. A faint imprint appears on the inside of the frosted window, the shape of a small hand, delicate and fading, as though someone once pressed it there from the other side. It lingers only for a moment before the light dissolves it completely. No one sees it, but for that brief moment, it's there, a quiet reminder that the night still holds its secrets, and that not every presence in the dark belongs to the living. By morning, the world has gone grey. Not bright, not truly day, but a pale diffusion of light that seeps through the frost-covered window like breath through linen. The air inside the cottage feels heavier now, not colder, exactly, but more solid, as though the night's silence has settled into the walls and refuses to leave. The father stirs first. He pushes himself upright slowly, joints stiff from the cold, and glances toward the hearth. What remains of the fire is little more than a ghost, a small mound of ash still faintly warm to the touch. He brushes his hand near it, careful not to disturb the fragile heat. The warmth that lingers feels almost personal, like a fading memory of something that once cared for them. He stands, swaying slightly, and steps toward the door. The floorboards beneath his feet are hard as stone, and each step seems to echo longer than it should. When he opens the door, the light that spills in is dull but relentless. Outside, everything has turned white, not the clean white of new snow, but a muted, aged whiteness that makes the world look ancient and brittle. He takes a shallow breath and lets it out in a slow plume. The air smells of wood smoke from unseen chimneys, though no smoke rises from theirs. There is also the faint scent of iron, the kind that comes when frost bites the wood too deep. He scans the path to the woodshed. The snow drifts there are higher than he expected, but he knows he must try. The last bundle of firewood burned through in the night, and without it, there will be no warmth for the next. Inside, the mother is awake too, still sitting near the sleeping child. She watches her husband move through the fogged window, his figure blurred into a grey silhouette. She does not call to him. There's nothing to say. She simply listens to the faint crunch of his steps, to the tiny creaks the cottage makes when it adjusts to the morning. Her stomach aches softly, not with sharp pain, but with the dull, persistent emptiness that's been growing for days. The bread they baked 3 nights ago is almost gone. Only a small piece remains, hard as stone and faintly sweet from mould. She breaks it carefully, the crumbs scattering like dust across her fingers. When the father returns, his hands are red and trembling, a small bundle of wood clutched to his chest. The silence between them feels heavier than before, but not unfriendly, just the silence of people who have run out of new words to say. He sets the wood down, arranges the pieces, and tries to coax a flame from the dying embers. The smoke that rises is thin and grey, curling slowly through the air like a spirit unsure of where to go. It takes time, patience, and breath. Each exhalation, a quiet negotiation with the cold. Eventually, a flicker appears, then another. The fire begins to live again, though weakly, its light uncertain and small. The room fills with a familiar smell, damp smoke and scorched wood. It seeps into the walls, into the fabric of their clothes, into their very hair. It's a smell that would cling for days, but to them it is the smell of safety, of survival. As the fire begins to hold, the child stirs. His eyes open just enough to see the faint glow, and he smiles a small, tired smile that disappears almost immediately. His mother brushes a strand of hair from his forehead, her fingers cool but careful. She doesn't speak, afraid that sound might disturb the fragile warmth. Outside, the world remains frozen and still. The snow on the roof groans faintly, as though it, too, feels the weight of time. Crows circle somewhere in the distance, their cries muffled by the heavy air. Occasionally, the faint echo of an axe strikes through the valley, someone else out there, still fighting the same slow battle against the cold. The father looks toward the window again. The frost patterns have changed during the night. Where before they spread in chaotic lines, now they seem more deliberate, curling in arcs that resemble letters, or perhaps symbols. He leans closer, studying them, but the meaning stays beyond reach. He wipes the glass gently with his sleeve, and as the frost melts away, he catches his own reflection. For a moment, it looks wrong, the eyes slightly out of alignment, the mouth slower to move. He blinks, and the reflection corrects itself. Just fatigue, he thinks. Just the cold playing tricks again. The hunger grows as the day passes, slow and constant. It isn't just physical, it becomes a kind of thinking, a rhythm beneath every action. The family doesn't speak of it. Instead, they stretch what they have, trading bites of stale bread for sips of boiled snow. The mother adds a few dried herbs to the pot, though the taste is faint, almost ghostly. Still, it's something warm, something shared. The smoke from the small fire begins to thicken, curling toward the rafters and clinging beneath the ceiling. It gathers in soft waves that drift lazily above their heads, dimming the light until the whole room glows in a muted amber haze. For hours, they sit in that golden smoke, their minds slow, their movements deliberate. It's strange what the body remembers in moments like these. The sound of the river in summer, the smell of bread baked properly, the feeling of bare feet on green grass. These memories come not as comfort, but as echoes, reminders of a life that seems almost imagined now. The child breaks the silence once. He asks quietly why the smoke always moves upward, even when there is nowhere left to go. His father thinks about it for a moment, then answers softly that maybe smoke is drawn to things it used to be, the air, the sky, the breath. The boy nods, as if that makes perfect sense, and returns to staring at the fire. Outside, the light begins to fade again. The second night approaches with the same slow certainty as the first. The world contracts, shrinking from endless fields to the narrow circle of firelight that holds the family together. The wind returns, brushing softly against the walls, testing the cracks, searching for a way in. And then, something peculiar happens. The smoke from the fire, which had been drifting lazily toward the ceiling, begins to move in slow, circular patterns, almost as if caught in a gentle whirlpool. The air feels thicker, the movement deliberate. It swirls above them for a few moments, then drifts toward the door, leaving faint, wavering trails that vanish into the shadows. No one speaks of it. The father pretends not to notice, though his eyes follow the last of the smoke as it fades. The mother pulls the child closer, whispering something soft and inaudible. It might be a prayer, or it might be a lullaby that has long forgotten its melody. For a while, all that remains is the rhythm of their breathing, slow, uneven, but steady. The fire crackles, the snow creaks, and somewhere deep within the walls, water freezes in tiny veins, expanding just enough to be heard. The house itself seems to breathe with them, wood shifting like tired lungs. Night falls again, as if it never truly ended. The fire burns low, the hunger deepens, and silence becomes something heavier, not absence, but presence. The kind of silence that feels like it's waiting for something. Before sleep takes them, the father glances once more at the frost on the window. The strange patterns have returned, sharper now, clearer. He almost thinks he can read them this time. Shapes resembling faces, perhaps. Or maybe words in a language only the winter remembers. He doesn't wake his wife. He doesn't move closer. He simply watches until his eyes blur and the frost becomes just frost again. Somewhere outside, beneath the white weight of the snow, the earth holds countless such cottages, each one silent, each one dreaming through the long winter. And above them all, the cold remains not cruel, not kind, but endless, a quiet witness to the small, flickering lives trying to survive beneath its gaze. The morning arrives without fanfare, no colour, no song, no warmth, only a gradual fading of darkness, like ink dissolving in water. The world outside the cottage is motionless, wrapped in white, so pure it seems almost unnatural. The snow glows faintly beneath the grey sky, reflecting light that doesn't feel like sunlight, but something older and quieter. Inside, the cottage breathes with faint life. The fire has long since died, leaving behind only a shallow basin of ash, cold and grey. The air tastes dry, metallic, tinged with the scent of smoke that clings to every surface. For a long while, no one moves. The silence is complete, almost reverent, as though the house itself is listening for something before allowing the day to begin. Eventually, the father stirs. His breath hangs in front of him, pale and slow. The stiffness in his limbs feels heavier than the day before, as though each night adds invisible weight to his bones. He sits up carefully, trying not to wake the others. His hands find his knees, rough skin against coarse wool. For a few moments, he simply sits in that grey stillness, watching faint ribbons of frost curl along the window's edge. The frost is thicker this morning, layered, intricate, as if it has been growing all night in quiet determination. It spreads across the glass like a living map, tracing rivers, forests, and coastlines that don't exist. The father leans closer, studying it, half wondering if the shapes are random or deliberate. It's strange how frost can seem to remember movement, how it settles in patterns that feel intentional. Almost knowing, he wipes a small patch of glass with his sleeve, revealing the world beyond. What he sees is both familiar and alien. The field outside is buried beneath a flawless sheet of ice, smooth as glass. The trees at the edge of the clearing bow under their burden of snow, their branches frozen in mid-gesture, as if caught whispering to one another. There are no footprints anywhere, not from man, not from animal, just silence and light. Behind him, the mother wakes. Her breath is uneven, the kind that catches before fully exhaling. She sits up slowly, her movements careful, weary. The child remains asleep, curled tightly under the blanket, his face hidden, his body a small island of warmth in an ocean of cold air. The father turns from the window. "It's colder," he murmurs softly. She nods, not because she hears him clearly, but because there's nothing else to say. Words seem fragile in the morning frost, likely to shatter if spoken too loudly. She moves toward the hearth, brushing aside the ash to see if anything glows beneath. There is nothing, only dust and the faint memory of heat. She sighs, quietly, and begins to arrange new wood, small pieces first, then larger ones. Her hands are trembling, but the motions are steady, practiced. When the first spark finally takes, she shields it carefully, coaxing it to life. The flame grows, thin and wavering, until a faint warmth spreads once more through the room. The smoke rises lazily, its scent richer now, thicker. It gathers in the beams above them before curling away toward the cracks in the roof. The sound it makes, soft crackling, low hums, a hiss when sap burns, fills the silence with something almost comforting. The child stirs awake, his eyelids flutter open, and for a brief moment he smiles, disoriented by the strange light filtering through the frost. "It's shining," he says, voice small. His mother looks toward the window. The frost does shine, faintly, almost like it's alive, catching every ripple of light, sending it dancing across the walls in slow motion. They eat little, a few crusts of bread, softened near the fire, shared between them. It is not enough, but it quiets the ache for now. The father breaks his portion into smaller pieces, as though by doing so it might feel like more. The mother gives most of hers to the boy, pretending she isn't hungry. As they eat, the wind begins to stir outside. It moves gently at first, brushing against the walls, then grows steadier, carrying with it a soft, rhythmic sound, a faint clinking, like glass tapping glass. The father steps to the door and listens. It takes a moment before he realizes it's the ice itself, expanding and contracting, shifting beneath the weight of the air. The sound is almost musical, each note distant, delicate, and eerily human. He stands there longer than he means to, half entranced by it. It reminds him of something he cannot name, not a melody, but a feeling, something half remembered from childhood winters. He closes the door gently and returns to the warmth of the fire. The day moves slowly, almost imperceptibly. The light outside never truly brightens. It lingers in that in-between state, neither day nor night. The family speaks little. They move through small tasks, gathering water from melted snow, patching gaps in the door with scraps of cloth, mending a loose seam in the blanket. These gestures are quiet acts of defiance against the cold, though no one calls them that. At some point in the afternoon, The mother glances toward the window and freezes. The frost has shifted again. What once looked like branching lines now resembles shapes, faint silhouettes, almost like figures walking across the glass. They are not detailed enough to be clear, but they seem to move when no one is watching. When she blinks, they vanish. She doesn't mention it. She only sits back down, wrapping her arms around herself. But her gaze keeps returning to the window, unbidden. As the day wanes, the light outside begins to turn blue, a deep, quiet blue that seeps into everything it touches. It fills the corners of the room, blurring edges, softening outlines. The fire's glow becomes gentler, golden against the cold blue of the world beyond. The contrast is almost beautiful in a melancholy way. The child begins to hum softly, a tune without pattern, a wandering melody that drifts aimlessly in the air. His voice is thin but steady, and the sound seems to please the fire, which crackles in rhythm. The mother smiles faintly. She recognizes the tune, though she cannot remember where it came from. Perhaps a village song, perhaps something the wind carried one night. When evening finally comes, it arrives quietly, blending with the day instead of replacing it. The family settles near the fire again, watching the frost reclaim the window pane. The father's eyelids grow heavy, his mind filled with half-thoughts, questions about how long the cold will last, when the first thaw might come, whether the frost outside will one day find its way in. The mother sits beside him, silent, her eyes unfocused, reflecting the firelight. Occasionally, she thinks she sees motion beyond the window, a faint shadow passing slowly across the snow. But when she looks directly, it's gone. It could be the shifting light, or something else. And then, as the night deepens, the world outside begins to whisper again. Not the howl of wind, but something softer, like distant voices carried on air that remembers. They come in faint murmurs, fragments of sound, rising and falling as though in conversation. The father tilts his head, listening, though he can't make out words. The strange thing is that the frost seems to respond. With each whisper, the patterns on the glass tremble faintly, glimmering as if touched by invisible breath. For a long time, no one speaks. They simply watch the frost, mesmerized by its slow shifting forms. The child's hum fades, replaced by the small, steady heartbeat of the fire. In this frozen morning that has turned to night again, time feels circular, every breath, every flicker of flame, every sigh repeating endlessly. Yet within that repetition, something ancient stirs. A reminder that winters have always whispered to those who listen too closely, and that sometimes, in the quiet hours between dawn and dark, the frost remembers more than it should. The morning had passed quietly, leaving behind a pale haze that clung to the edges of the fields. The air had softened, but not enough to be called kind. Frost still traced the outlines of every branch, every piece of wood, and even the thatch of the cottages seemed caught between life and glass. Inside, the last coals of the fire whispered to one another, faintly glowing beneath the grey dust of ash. The people were slow to rise that day. It was not only weariness, but something quieter, something that comes after too many nights of waiting for the cold to pass. Their movements had grown automatic, stoking the fire, checking the roof for leaks, breaking the thin ice from the bucket, all gestures from a life that repeated itself like the ticking of a frozen clock. But in the silence, there was a strange comfort, the kind that only comes when the body stops fighting what cannot be fought. The villagers no longer cursed the cold or pleaded with the sky. They had begun to accept its company not as an enemy, but as something ancient and inevitable. The frost had a rhythm, a pulse of its own. It carved patterns on their windows and left silver dust on their breath. In some quiet way, it reminded them that they were still alive to see it. In one cottage, an old woman sat by the dim glow of the hearth, her hands folded around a wooden cup. The drink inside had long cooled, but she didn't seem to notice. Her gaze rested on the corner where a piece of cloth hung over a crack in the wall. The wind slipped through, humming softly like a voice too distant to understand. Sometimes she imagined it carried words not from the present, but from winters long before her own. Outside, the world had lost its colour. Everything was muted. The fields, the trees, even the sky itself seemed pale and thin, as if the earth had forgotten how to dream in colour. Yet, in that stillness, something gentle lingered. The faint scent of smoke, the crunch of snow under careful footsteps, the sigh of a door closing against the wind. All these small, fragile sounds became reminders that life, even when quiet, continues. Children, wrapped in heavy layers, played with the frost on the windows, drawing small shapes that vanished as soon as they breathed too close. They laughed in whispers, as though afraid that speaking too loudly might disturb the balance of the cold. Their cheeks were red, their eyes bright tiny sparks of warmth in a world made of silence. By midday, the sun appeared, a pale disk behind the clouds. Its light fell weakly on the rooftops, glinting off the frozen eaves. For a few moments, it gave the illusion of warmth. People stepped outside, lifting their faces toward the dull glow, pretending it was enough. In those brief stretches of sunlight, they remembered what it felt like to hope not in a grand, dramatic way, but in small, almost invisible gestures. A deep breath, a smile that lasted a little longer than usual, the decision to keep one more log for the night. Yet beneath this quiet acceptance, a strange thing began to stir, not in the air, but in memory. Stories returned, drifting between the cottages like lost smoke. Some spoke of winters so harsh that even the rivers froze solid enough for carts to cross. Others told of travellers who vanished in the snow, leaving behind only footprints that ended without reason. And then there were gentler tales of nights when people claimed they heard warmth itself whispering, a hum beneath the wind, guiding them toward the next dawn. No one truly believed those stories, and yet no one dismissed them either. They existed in that same space as the frost, visible but untouchable. The villagers carried them quietly, passing them down as if they were small fires, each one a flicker of warmth that refused to die completely. As evening approached, the horizon darkened into a soft grey. The smoke from each chimney rose slowly, curling into the air like ribbons of fading thought. Inside the cottages, people gathered closer, not because the cold had worsened, but because the memory of warmth had begun to feel like a fragile thing, something that needed to be protected. They spoke, softly, if at all. The crackling of the fire filled the silence where words might have gone. The flames were low, and yet everyone stared into them, as though they could see something there, not just the light, but the reflection of lives spent waiting for the thaw. In one corner, a child asked his mother why the frost never sleeps. She smiled faintly, tracing the edge of his blanket. "Because," she whispered, "the frost remembers what warmth forgets." The boy didn't quite understand, but he nodded, comforted by the sound of her voice more than the meaning of her words. Outside, night began its slow descent. The fields, the cottages, and even the faint line of trees beyond the river faded into shades of blue and grey. The world was quiet again, wrapped in its thin veil of ice, and somewhere within that silence, a strange truth lingered that even in the heart of winter, warmth is never truly gone. It hides in the breath shared between two people, in the pulse beneath a wool sleeve, in the faint red glow behind closed eyelids as one drifts towards sleep. The frost crept higher on the windows that night, but inside, no one fought it. They simply watched. And perhaps in that stillness, they began to understand something the cold had been trying to teach all along, that warmth is not just fire, nor is it something that can be taken or lost. It is the memory of comfort, the echo of all the night survived, and the quiet promise that someday the frost will melt and the world will remember how to breathe again. And so the night deepened, calm and unbroken. The old woman by the hearth closed her eyes. The child finally drifted to sleep, and the frost outside continued its patient work, tracing the world with its fragile, glittering hand. The forgotten warmth, though unseen, lingered in every breath they took, waiting for the first light of spring to call it back into being. The night had returned, though in truth it had never really gone. The sky outside was a deep shade of blue-black, so heavy it seemed to press against the thatched roofs, sealing the world in silence. The moon, hidden behind a veil of frost clouds, offered only a faint silvery glow that glimmered on the frozen branches. It was the kind of night that felt endless, not frightening, not cruel, but timeless, as if the world itself had paused to take one long frozen breath. Inside the cottages, the fires had burned low again. The embers pulsed faintly, their glow breathing in and out like tired hearts. People spoke little now. Words had become unnecessary things too fragile to waste in the cold air. Every sound felt magnified, from the creak of the wooden walls to the slow, rhythmic crack of the ice outside. There was a strange stillness in that darkness, a sense that something had shifted quietly, beyond the reach of the living. Some said the frost had learned their names, whispering them back in the wind. Others believed the world had fallen asleep, and they were the only ones left awake inside its dream. Whatever the truth, no one questioned it. The night had settled over them like an old quilt, heavy, comforting, and just a little too quiet. Out in the fields, the snow no longer glittered. It lay flat and dull, a vast mirror for the faint light of the stars. Somewhere far away, perhaps beyond the line of the hills, a dog barked once, then fell silent. Even the animals had learned to whisper. The world was conserving its energy, holding on to whatever warmth remained. Inside, an old man stirred beside the fire. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes following the faint curl of smoke that slipped up the chimney and out into the endless dark. "It never ends," he murmured softly, though it wasn't clear if he meant the cold, the night, or simply the passing of time itself. Then he smiled, faintly, as if amused by his own thought, and settled back into his chair. In the stillness, time began to lose its meaning. Hours no longer moved in straight lines, but folded softly over one another, like layers of snow. It became difficult to tell when evening had become night, or when night would become morning again. The frost outside the windows grew thicker, its patterns curling like veins across the glass. To some, it began to look almost alive, a slow creeping map of the world beyond, drawn by unseen hands. The people had stopped counting the days. They no longer waited for the thaw. Instead, they lived inside the rhythm of the cold. They ate little, slept often, and spoke as though each word might break the fragile peace that held them there. The night had become both their prison and their protector, and yet, amid that endless cold, small wonders continued to exist. A candle flame that refused to die, its wick bending but never breaking, the faint warmth of two hands meeting beneath a wool blanket, the quiet hum of a lullaby sung by a mother whose own mother had once sung the same words in winters long forgotten. These small things, fragile as frost itself, became the entire meaning of survival. There were moments, too, when something strange happened, subtle, barely noticeable, like a shift in air pressure. Some claimed they saw faint lights in the distance, moving slowly across the hills, as if someone or something was carrying lanterns through the dark. Others said they heard voices just beyond the edge of hearing, murmuring softly from the snow itself. But those who went out to look never found anything. Only the quiet, only the cold. And yet, when they returned inside, they carried with them a feeling not of fear, but of wonder, a sense that perhaps the night was not empty after all. Perhaps it was listening. As the hours slipped by, Sleep came and went like a tide. The villagers drifted between waking and dreaming, unable to tell one from the other. Some dreamed of green fields and running water, of sunlight so warm it made them weep. Others dreamed of strange figures walking through the snow, tall, silent shapes with faces too blurred to name. The dreams never frightened them. They were simply part of the night, like the frost and the silence. The line between life and memory had thinned so much that both now existed side by side, quietly breathing together. By what should have been dawn, the light had not yet come. The horizon remained dark, and the frost on the glass glowed faintly with its own inner light, as if the night had decided it no longer needed the Sunday. The villagers began to understand that perhaps this was not a single night at all, but the same night, continuing, looping gently upon itself. And strangely, they did not despair. There was peace in that realization. The endless night did not ask anything of them. It did not demand labor, or fear, or hope. It only asked them to rest, to listen, to remember the sound of their own breathing. Outside, snow began to fall again, slow and soft, like ash descending from a sky that had forgotten fire. It covered the footprints near the doors, smoothing everything into stillness. The world seemed to be erasing itself, one quiet flake at a time. Inside, the last fires dimmed, leaving only a faint red shimmer. The old woman by the hearth sighed once, her breath misting in the air before fading. She smiled faintly, as though remembering something, perhaps a summer from long ago, or the scent of bread baking in an oven long gone cold. Her eyes closed, not in exhaustion, but in peace. The cottage, like all the others, settled deeper into silence. The frost continued to climb the walls, tracing its patient designs. The wind outside hummed its low, steady note, neither cruel nor kind, simply eternal. And as the night went on, as it always did, the world seemed to exhale, slowly and completely. Every sound softened, every movement slowed. It was as if the earth itself had decided to rest. Perhaps that is the truth of such winters, that they are not meant to be fought, only understood. That beneath the stillness and the cold, there lies a kind of quiet kindness, a reminder that even endings can be soft. And so, as the last ember faded into darkness, the night remained vast, unbroken, and infinite. A night that never ends. A night that holds everything in its frozen arms, warmth and silence, memory and dream, all resting together beneath the slow drift of snow. If you're still awake, perhaps you can hear it, the sound of the frost breathing outside your window, steady and calm. Let it remind you that even the coldest nights pass in their own time, and that every silence carries a story waiting to be remembered. So, close your eyes now, let the quiet guide you, and until we meet again, good night.